Chagiga Daf Chaf Dalid, the Gemara concludes its discussion of the listing of situations in which the halachos of Kodesh are stricter than the halachos of Truma as far as Tum and Tahara are concerned. The Gemara will go through the last few cases in the Mishnah, spending the majority of the time discussing one hand being Matame, another hand. And then towards the end of the Daf, will introduce our next Mishnah, which discusses one situation in which Truma is actually stricter than Kodesh. So let's begin. We're a few lines in. We just have to conclude one last line from our previous discussion. We had seen we were discussing the rule that a number of items in one kli all become tamei together. And we had a question whether that was a halacha derabanan or deraisa. So the Gemara had set up till now that was a halacha deraisa. The Gemara just brings that Rav Chia bar Abba argues on Rav Yochanan, and he says that this is a halacha midirabanan, not like we've said earlier. Okay, now the Gemara goes on to the halacha of revi'i. So we know that Kodesh can be a revi'i l'tuma. That is, the thing which is a source of tuma itself is called an avatuma. What it touches is a rishon, first level tuma. That touches something else, becomes a second, then a third, and then a fourth. So we'd seen in the Mishnah that Truma can be up to third level. If it's touched by a shlishi, it doesn't become tummy at all. Revi'i, Kodesh can be a revi'i. It can be one level lower, and it cannot be a chamishi. It can't be further than that. Now, the last level is not called tamei. It's called puzzle. Tamei means that it is a tamei itself and can make something else tamei. So Truma can be a tamei sheni, because then it can go ahead and make a shlishi, but that shlishi is called a puzzle because it cannot make a revi. A revi of tuma is not tamei at all. Now, in Kodesh, you can be a revi, you can be a fourth level tuma, but that is called puzzle and not tamei because it can't make a fifth level. The Gemara says, what is the source of this halacha that you can have a fourth level tuma in Kodesh? The Gemara says, I'm going to show it to you with the Kal V'chomer. This is not a classic Kal V'chomer because it shows that the stricter level can go beyond the weaker level. But as in every Kal V'chomer, we start by showing that Kodesh is stricter halachos than Truma. We show that in the halacha of Mechusar Kippurim, somebody who was not allowed to eat Truma or Kodesh because he was obligated to bring a carbon, and he wasn't fully tar until after the carbon was brought. So a person like that who hasn't brought the carbon yet, he's allowed to eat Truma, but he's not allowed to eat karbanos. That's clear in Psukim. The Gemara derives that in various other sources. So you see there that Kodesh is stricter than Truma in the case of Mechusar Kippurim. Now, as far as a shlishi and a revi, so we know that Truma can make a shlishi. Truma can be a shlishi l'tuma, and we've already shown that Kodesh has to be stricter than Truma. Therefore, Kodesh has to be able to make a revi'i for Truma. Now, that's strange because usually you only say that the stricter one has to be at least as strict as the lighter one. Here we're saying that it's actually one level further. So the Gemara says it's got to be that it's one level further because otherwise I don't need this Kal V'chomer to teach me anything. If it's just to teach me that Kodesh could also be a shlishi, just like Truma, because it's not any lighter than Truma, that's halach I know already. The Gemara says I already have a source from a pasuk explicitly almost that tells me that Kodesh could be a shlishi, and that's from the fact that it says V'abasar Chagiga b'chol tamei lo ye'achel. It says that meat, that is carbon meat, that touches a tamei, it itself cannot be eaten. When it says tamei, the word tamei minimally refers to a sheni. It can be something stricter than a sheni. So it has to be referring at least to a sheni. It says that carbon meat that touches a sheni becomes tamei itself. If it's touching a sheni, it itself is a shlishi. So therefore you have a pasuk that clearly says that Kodesh can be a shlishi. Now we have a rule that a Kal V'chomer has to be teaching me something. And if it's not teaching me anything that I don't know already, then it can teach me something stricter than that what it's being learned from. So here it's being learned from Truma. Truma we know could be a shlishi. This has to be stricter because we already know that Kodesh could be a shlishi, and therefore it could teach me that Truma could be a revi'i. So that's the Gemara's source. Now the Gemara goes on to the next case in our Mishnah. We'd seen that if you have one hand that's tamei, the other hand is tamei as well. So the Gemara interprets this slightly differently here. The Gemara says it means that one hand that touches another hand is matame the other hand. Now this can mean a number of different things. First of all, generally a hand cannot contract tumah from another hand. A hand can only become tame from a liquid, because a hand can't be less than a sheni. So the Gemara here is saying that a hand could become tame from another hand. That's simplest level. We're referring to one's own hand. If one's left hand is tame, for example, and it touches the right hand, so the Gemara is understanding it now, then the right hand becomes tame. So it's a chiddush, first of all, to say that it becomes tame at all, because generally a hand doesn't become tame from a hand. The Gemara is considering there may even be another chiddush here, is that not only does it become tame, but it has the same level of tumah as what it got tumah from. That is, if the left hand was a sheni for tumah, the right hand is also going to be a sheni for tumah. So the Gemara is going to try to understand this here. What do we mean? So the Gemara first quotes Rav Shizbi, who understands this differently altogether. He says we're not saying that the second hand becomes tamei when it's touched by the first hand. A hand doesn't become tamei from another hand. Can't get tumah from a hand. It can only get it from something that's a rishon l'tumah. Generally, hands are considered to be a sheni l'tumah. So the Gemara says what it means is as follows. If at the time that a tamei hand is touching a tahar hand, the tahar hand is touching karbanos, is touching kodesh, we consider the kodesh to be tamei as well. That means to say as follows. We would not generally say, if your left hand is tamei, that means it's a sheni, the left hand's a sheni, and it touches your right hand, the most it could be would be to make the right hand a shlishi, which would mean that if the right hand goes and it touches karbanos, those karbanos are a revi. That's not a true halacha. The right hand does not become a shlishi from being touched by the left hand. All that happens is that if the left hand, if the tamei hand is touching the tahar hand at the same time that the tahar hand is touching kajim, we are metame the kajim. And then, not because it's being touched by a shlishi, but because we're afraid that the sheni left hand also touched the karbanos, also touched the kodesh. Since it's touching your tahar hand, and the tahar hand is touching kodesh, we're afraid that the tamei hand touched the kodesh, and therefore we are metame it. That's what Rav Shizbi's claim is. So Abai has to kash on this. Abai says that doesn't seem to be correct, because you see this halacha said over in a brisa, and the brisa over there says that if it's a dry hand can be metame the other hand. Meaning it points out that this halacha is true even if the tamei hand is dry. This is Abai. If you're telling me that we're afraid that the tamei hand touched the carbon, that's what this halacha is all about. Who cares if it's wet or dry? Tamei hand touches carbon, even if it's not wet, it's metame that hand. Doesn't make any sense. It makes no difference if it's wet or dry. The other way this makes sense is if we're saying that the tamei hand is actually metame the tahar hand itself. Now we have a chiddush, because if it would be wet, there's no chiddush, because a wet hand makes water tamei. Water always becomes a rishon l'tumah, even if it's touched by a sheni. That's halacha d'Rabbanan. Water is a special concept that if it's touched by a sheni, the water itself becomes a rishon mid'Rabbanan, and then that rishon goes in his matame the other hand. It's a rishon that turns a hand into a sheni. That's a classic halacha. So there wouldn't be any chiddush there. The chiddush is that even though the tamei hand is dry, your other hand can become tamei from your tahar. Your tahar hand can become tamei from your tamei hand, even if it's dry. That makes sense. But then that means we're not talking about where you're touching at the same time and we're afraid that the tamei hand also touched the kodesh. That's not what this is about at all. The Gemara now has a halacha question in the concept of one hand and making another hand tamei. That as we've said, that one's own hand could be matame his other hand. What about, can one's hand be matame someone else's hand? So the Gemara says machlokes Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish initially. That is, Reish Lakish says that one's hand cannot be matame someone else's hand, at least if it's not wet. Hand doesn't transfer tumah to a hand. This special halacha of a hand being matame, another hand is only one's own hand, not someone else's hand. Rav Yochanan says no, you can also be matame someone else's hand, and Rav Yochanan says that it can do it to make the other hand into a shlishi, not into a sheni. That means that although one's own hand can make his other hand into a sheni, if your left hand is a sheni l'tumah and it touches your right hand also becomes a sheni l'tumah, which is a chiddush. If your tamei hand that touches someone else's hand, that only makes that hand into a shlishi, which can then go turn kodesh into a revi. It cannot make your other hand into a sheni, which would then turn kodesh into a shlishi, that can then go be matame another kodesh afterwards. That we do not say. Also, Rabbi Yochanan says it's only your original hand that became tamei that's matame someone else's hand. If your tamei hand is matame your tahar hand, and then your tahar hand goes and touches someone else, that's already a shlishi trying to make a revi. That doesn't do. Now, the Gemara says that Reish Lakish also changed his opinion. And the reason is because Rav Yochanan has a strong proof to his way of seeing things, and that's from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah, when it described the one hand as matame another, used a double phrase. It said that if someone's one hand is tame, his other hand requires tefillah, and it's tame as well, because a hand makes another hand tame as far as kodesh is concerned. Why do we need that extra repetition, that second phrase? That's to teach me that it even applies to someone else's hand. A hand makes a hand, meaning even someone else's hand. Now, Reish Lakish changed his opinion. He also agrees with Rav Yochanan. The Gemara quotes Rav Yono, says that in the name of Ami. Reish Lakish actually says one can be matami someone else's hand. Only one's original tummy hand can be matami someone else's hand, and can make it a shlishi but not a sheni. Now the Gemara wants to say, hey, maybe as to what level you make the second hand, maybe that's machlokes tanoim. We see a Mishnah or a Brisa which has two opinions, whether the second hand becomes a sheni or becomes a shlishi. So Gemara quotes two attempts to show this in a Mishnah. The first one is a machlokes between Rav Yeshua and the Chachamim, where it says that any hand that makes truma puzzle is matame the hands. Making truma puzzle means that you're talking about a hand which is a sheni. Makes truma puzzle because then that truma becomes a shlishi. That's called puzzle, as we said. Truma can't be a revi, cannot push it further. So we have a hand which is a sheni. So according to the Tanakama, it makes the other hand shnios. It says the other hand becomes a sheni. Now, that's what Rav Yeshua says. The Chachamim say no. A hand is a sheni, and a sheni cannot make another thing a sheni. So Gemara says, you see, the machlokes is whether it becomes a sheni, whether the second hand becomes a sheni or a shlishi. The Gemara says, no. The Chachamim are not saying that the second hand becomes a shlishi. The Chachamim is saying the second hand doesn't become tummy at all. A sheni can't make a sheni, and therefore it gets no tumah whatsoever. There is no shlishi on hands. So therefore you don't see this machlokes that you're saying at all from this Mishnah. So Gemara says, I'll show you a Brisa that says it. The Brisa says that if one dry hand touches another hand, it makes it tameh enough to be matame kodesh, but not truma. According to Rebbe, according to Rabbi Yosi, by Rabbi Yehuda, it makes the hand able to be one level further, but not a level beyond that. So that means to say that is a machlokes there, whether it's a sheni or a shlishi. Shlishi couldn't go further, and a sheni is able to go further to make a shlishi, and therefore to be matame kodesh one level, but not that kodesh can be matame something else. Is the second hand, because it then becomes a shlishi and cannot make a revi. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to the next halacha which we've seen in the Mishnah, and that is that if somebody is eating dry food, he's allowed to eat it with tamei hands. That's only true as far as truma is concerned. For karbanos, for kachim, for kodesh, one is not allowed to eat food with tamei hands, even if the food is dry. So Gemara says, first of all, this makes no sense. What's the difference if food is dry or not dry? The only purpose of dry food is that when a food becomes wet, it becomes hochshar to be makabel tumah. It's already prepared to be makabel tumah. Well, in kodesh, there is no such halacha. Every kodesh is makabel tumah automatically because of halacha called chibas hakodesh. Because of the special stringency, the halachos of kodesh, it's automatically ready to be makabel tumah even if it was never wet. So what is this talking about? So Gemara says it's not referring to food that's wet, it's referring to food that's dry. Rashi says it was wet at some point, and therefore we're talking about food which is able to be makabel tumah. How then can we say you could eat it with wet hands, with tamei hands? The Gemara says what's happening is as follows. You're getting the food into your mouth without touching it with something which is going to make it tamei. Either somebody else puts it in your mouth, and that person has tar hands, or you're putting it in your mouth by means of a toothpick or some other flat wooden kli that doesn't transfer tumah to that food. So you're getting the food into your mouth without it being tameh at all. Now, the fact that your hands are tameh are not a problem for that reason. However, you also want to eat chulin at the same time. And that chulin is mukhshar to mikabel tumah. That chulin has been wet in the past. And therefore you're going to be metame that chulin. Now that chulin is not going to be metame the other food in your mouth, because food doesn't make other food into tameh. A sheni cannot make a sheni further in chulin. However, we are concerned that if you're touching the food, that the chulin that you're eating, and you're being mitami, that you may also touch the kodesh that's being put into your mouth. And therefore, we say that as far as kodesh, you can't do that. If it would be truma, you could, but in kodesh, we don't let you do that. All right, now we get to the next and last halacha in the Mishnah, which is that a mechusar kippurim, somebody who had to bring a carbon to get out of a complete tumah state, he is obligated to go to the mikveh before he can eat kachim. However, he's allowed to eat truma without going to the mikveh first. That is going to the mikveh again, besides for his previous tefillah the day before. And also in onin. An onin is also needs to go to the mikveh before he's allowed to eat kachim. What's the reason for this? So the Gemara says the reason is simple. In onin and in mechusar kippurim are not allowed to eat kachim. That we know from halacha. Here we're saying he has to go to the mikvah even once he's permitted to eat it, and that's a din derabanan. Somebody who is not allowed to eat, that is both in onin and in mechusar kippurim, are not allowed to eat kachim. They need to go to the mikvah even once they are allowed to eat it. The Rabbanan said, besides, once the mechusar kippurim ends, that is once they bring their carbon, or once they're no longer in onin, because the person that died has been buried already, so now they're technically allowed to eat kachim, they have to go to the mikveh first. And the reason is, we're afraid that they stopped guarding themselves from tumah while they were not allowed to eat those things. They said, I can't eat kachim anyway, so I'll stop watching my tumah state. Therefore, they have to go to the mikveh first. We don't allow them to just go straight ahead and eat it once it becomes permitted to them. And now we begin our next Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses the situation, one halacha in which truma is stricter than kachim, and that is trusting an amaretz. Generally, an amaretz is not trusted to say that things are tahar. We assume amaretzim aren't careful in the halachas of tumah, therefore we consider them to be tameh altogether. However, if he sets aside wine or oil to bring to the mizbeach as kachim, as nesachim, we trust him to keep it clean and tahar, because they're very careful about the halachos of kachim. Generally, we're not so impressed, but if they set something aside, they're makdashid, we say they probably kept those halachas carefully. Another reason is we want to be careful not to allow them to bring karbanos nesachim on their own mizbechos. So we have to allow them to bring it to the main beis hamikdash, to the mizbeach in the beis hamikdash. We don't want them to go somewhere else with it. Now, the halacha applies all year round. That is, if they made it kodesh, we assume that they kept an eye on it and kept it tahar all year round. Now, as far as truma, we don't say that. As far as truma, we say that it's only considered to be tahar at the time that grapes and wine are pressed. They each have their own season. When grapes are pressed, the truma is tahar. When olives are pressed, the oil is tahar. However, once the pressing season ends, we assume they don't keep an eye on it, even though it's truma, and it becomes tameh afterwards. Therefore, if somebody wants to receive or take or buy wine or oil from an amaretz during pressing season, as long as it's truma, he could assume that it's tahar then. Once pressing season ends, he can't trust him, and it probably became tameh. Now, that being the case, when he's makdish the wine or the oil, it has to be that he was makdish it during pressing season. Otherwise, it became tameh already, even before he got a chance to be makdish it. Now, says the Mishnah, what happens if Amaretz brought a barrel of wine or oil or truma to a Kohen and Talmud Chacham after the pressing season? So he's not allowed to accept it. He should assume that it's tameh and he can't accept it. Now, however, if the Amaretz wants to, he can hold on to it until next year's pressing season, then give it to the Kohen, and then the Kohen is allowed to accept it, even if he knows that it's from last year's crop. And that is because we made a general rule, you're allowed to accept it during pressing season, even if it's, and that therefore applies even if it's probably became tameh over the course of the past year. During pressing season, we don't have a problem with that. Now, another way out of this is if the Amaretz says that there is a cupful or so of wine or oil in this barrel which I made kachim, then we could assume that because you had to keep that stuff tahar, you had to keep all of it tahar, and therefore you could assume that all of it is okay. Now the Mishnah ends with halacha, which will need to be explained by the Gemara in detail, and that is, we have jugs of wine or oil that are mixed together. Rashi says mixed together also with chulin, that is, you have truma, kachim, and chulin all mixed together. So the Amaretz is believed to say that they are tahar during pressing season and 70 days before pressing season, but not after pressing season.